Good morning. Welcome to the first Tales from the Field session from Palo Alto Networks. As you might expect, we'll be waiting just while everybody joins, and we'll get some of the let everybody just join in. And if there's any Zoom problems, any Zoom clients needing updated, then that's all taken care of. Thank you. So we've got a good mix of people joining now. Just while folk are coming in, I'll just orientate you to what we're going to be doing today. So there will be a Q&A box that you can use to ask any questions as we're going along. There's also the chat function as well, if you want to say hi, but do try and keep the questions in the Q&A. That's just really helpful for us to track and then get back to you if it turns into a more in-depth discussion. Also on the webinar, I've got some colleagues helping me out, so you won't have to wait for my fast fingers to type any answers together. Richard Coleman will be on answering some of your questions as well. I see more and more people are joining. That's great. As I said, we'll just wait till maybe 2 minutes into the meeting just to give everybody time to join in. So sit back and relax. I'm broadcasting here from the Bishopsgate, 22 Bishopsgate, Palo Alto's new office in London. And I would turn around and show you the view, but unfortunately it is clouds and mist this morning. So instead, I thought a clock behind my head to remind me to keep the time might be a more appropriate background for you. But if any of you haven't managed to make a chance to, or make a meeting with your channel partners to come into the office and see at least the views from up here, I would highly recommend it. Not just to hear about our latest SASE products and how some of our customers are using them. So for those who've just joined, welcome to the webinar this morning. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you've got any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. And then we've got some SEs on the call, Richard Coleman, who'll be typing any answers to technical questions you've got. And if there's anything you'd like to follow up on, please do reach out to Nikki or use the chat function to say hi. And we'll be more than happy to have any more in-depth discussions if there's something here that piques your interest. But we're 2 minutes in, so as promised, without any further ado, let's get started. So what is the purpose of these webinars? Well, what we really wanted to do is to go a little bit beyond the standard channel enablement that happens through your Palo Alto Networks colleagues, where we tell you about the products. So instead, you get someone like me, who's a core SE, who's out in the field working with customers to really talk about real life projects and some of the challenges that I've come across, and then how, in this case, SASE has been really helpful. But more specifically, what are customers really taking on when they embark on a SASE project? What is the reality? And how do we really need the channel to help us as a vendor be successful, but also the customers to be successful in these investment and transformation projects? So when I was asked to do this, I had one clear example in mind of a partner, of a customer who didn't go with a partner. They just used the partner as a transaction mechanism. And I thought through the whole project, they really should have come with a partner. So I really want to talk about what a SASE project really means. So I've been a systems engineer at Palo Alto now for nearly 5 years. Time is ticking on. So when I joined, Palo Alto was very much just a thin firewall company. So I've been with the company as it has evolved now to this true multi-platform offering that's spanning multiple use cases, not just SASE. So let's get into the rest of the presentation. So how do SASE projects come together? What drives a customer to want to adopt them? What are those building blocks? How can we use some of them, maybe not all of them? How do different shapes of a project fit within different customers' parameters? And then where can you guys as the channel fit into this? And these are often the questions that I think customers are struggling with. So we'll go into some of these now. So what are the building blocks of SASE? Now, some of you will have seen these slides before, but how can IT provide that optimal user experience? So we're going very much from the left-hand side here, whether a user is at home, whether a user is at the coffee shop, or the office, and genuinely in an airplane, how do they reach these new applications as businesses are changing? So we've moved from having applications predominantly in a data center, or in some cases in that cupboard at the end of the hall, now to SaaS-based applications, internet-based applications. So whether customers like it or not, they are being forced to change. They are being forced to change how traffic routes from the user's device to the application in question. And then as we move away from a traditional maybe MPLS network that the network team could very carefully calibrate, and we could run QoS algorithms across, and we could monitor the traffic usage, and we could spot bandwidth limitations, we're now reliant much more on the internet. So how do we provide not just an optimal security experience, but an optimal user experience? Now, to speak of security, now that we're moving these applications to the cloud, how do we secure those? How do we validate who that user is? How do we validate that the data that's transferring to and from that application is not only safe, but is sanctioned for that user to have access to? And all the while narrowing and tightening that security experience, not just for the company, but for the SOC itself. And this is where I'd say the key tenets of SASE, or the building blocks of SASE, really came from. So we talk about zero trust security. There's a lot going around on the internet about that as a buzzword, but fundamentally it is a strategy, not a product, focusing on who is that user, what are they accessing, and how are they accessing it. Prisma SASE can provide that to a customer that is not doing that today. We can add on our SD-WAN to this, providing exceptional network capacity and monitoring, not just looking at jitter, packet loss, and latency, but how those applications are behaving, performing, and then should we be routing traffic across multiple links based on that application type? And then finally, how are users experiencing that transaction? Is it going well? Are they a user working from home who has put the router behind their couch because it doesn't look good in their living room? How are IT teams meant to troubleshoot that? And then how are we meant to digest all of that data and present it in a way that somebody with maybe a low skill cap or is early in career can make use of and give helpful actions? And this is where I'm sure you've been to any Palo Alto presentation about SASE. These things shouldn't be new to you. It's where the industry is going, and a lot of our competitors are saying the same thing. But fundamentally, these core tenets, these principles that customers are driving towards, boil down, I think, to one of these 4 boxes. You're either going to be looking at a private app access project in the top left, and that is fundamentally connecting users who are not on premise securely and with a good identity experience to the application, whether it's in the cloud, in IaaS, or back on the data center. They're looking to secure their internet access at the top right, so perhaps a secure web gateway replacement, but ultimately they're saying we don't want to have our web filtering on premise. We want to move that to the cloud where it's closer to the data that users are accessing. Down the bottom left, they're looking at how their branches connect, so perhaps moving away from the classic would be moving away from an MPLS legacy network, or maybe an older style SD-WAN to something that's a little bit more cloud focused to where their data is. Or they're looking at application sprawl. What different SaaS applications are in use across my business? Who is sending data to what provider? How do I track? How do I manage? How do I enforce that? How do I begin to have the data to have a conversation around these things? Now, if you start to visualize the personas behind these 4 boxes, some of them are similar. Maybe the top 2, maybe the kind of the quadrant to the top left there, that's more network engineer. But then there's also the data governance, there's project management. If you're talking about a more distributed service, branch connectivity can be in the hands of local leaders as opposed to kind of a centralized function as well. And this is where, in my experience, SASE projects have started to run into the ground as customers get their eyes on the possibilities that they have with all these different features. How do they start to pick what ones to do first? How do they start to chunk this up into different packages of work? Because we as Palo Alto would come along and we'd start talking about our products. And this is where we really differentiate. We can tell a great story, an industry leading story across all of these different project types. be it in the top left there, looking at how users are transferring around the network environment, looking at things like Global Protect, and to highlight there at the top here, our new Talon Secure Enterprise browser. So now no longer needing installed VPN agent, but rather having a browser that's totally controlled by the organization. Clientless as well, but ultimately identifying the user and then saying where they're going to connect to. Down at the bottom there, we'll talk about Prisma SD-WAN, Panos SD-WAN, other SD-WANs in question. For CASB as well, talking about our inline SaaS security posture management. Have you configured it properly? Have you turned all the buttons on? SaaS inline, what applications are the ones that are on your network? How are those talking to different areas of your business? Are they the right job titles that should be accessing those applications? What countries is that data then residing in? And then up as well to the kind of classic Palo Alto story, where we really do excel is in secure internet access with things like advanced URL filtering, checking every URL as it's accessed, decrypting all SSL traffic, DNS security for all DNS transactions without having resolver, as well as advanced threat prevention and advanced wildfire. This is the Palo Alto story. But what does it mean to the customer? What does it mean when they embark on these projects? How do they start to digest some of this? How do they start to choose what to do next? So I want to tell you a little bit about my customer and a story that a project I worked with, about how they encountered a lot of these problems as they started to want to change, but then had to realize that, wait, we cannot do all of this at once. So I'll set the scene using the graphic that's on the screen here. As this was a customer that had a lot of branches around the world. So there was lots of, well, at the time they were using SD-WAN, but also a bit of MPLS in the background. It was a mixed estate, but fundamentally they had a firewall at every site, every location had a Palo Alto. And they were paying for URL licensing, they were paying for a DNS licensing. So the frustration was, hey, we've got a large sprawl. Can we consolidate all of this licensing into one location? So that then became an internet access project. Also, they had different firewalls around the world that they were running Global Protect on. So they had users coming back to those physical firewalls and then breaking out to the internet. So also it was a VPN access project. And then as we were starting to talk to the different stakeholders, they said, hey, well, we like that slide that was in the deck about SaaS security posture management. Let me introduce you to our data governance team. And suddenly we had this big project with lots of stakeholders involved. Now, this customer then chose, let me go on to the next slide, to draw up a bit of a requirements document. They wanted to harden their perimeter. They wanted to have secure by design, ZTNA policy. They wanted to simplify the posture management and consistent control. They were also about growing the size of their business. They didn't want, they wanted to not just be, they wanted to be able to onboard new companies that they bought very quickly. They didn't want to have to wait for specific kit to arrive or for lines to be run into the location. They wanted to be able to double the size of their business within the next 5 years through acquisitions. So that was a huge driver for them to be part of it, as well as being able to segment that traffic. So as the users were identified, both locally and in the cloud, how could they then say, well, they should only be able to access these parts of the network? So completely locking off any chance of a lateral attack if they didn't have the correct user ID. They also had our Cortex XDR agent installed. So they were looking for tighter integration with the Cortex XDR agent than they had already. And fundamentally, we're moving away from on-premise data centers to the cloud, so that they didn't have to maintain hardware was a weak point for them. They wanted to pass that off to the hyperscalers. So I've simplified and taken out a lot of the detail on this slide, but fundamentally our design looked like this if we go into the different operating companies that the customer had. Is they had lots of Palo Alto devices on site already that they wanted to use. They wanted to use have mobile users connecting in to Global Protect in the cloud. and then also have all of this talk back to the public cloud fundamentally for their private apps, but then also the internet for their increasing use of SaaS. So this fulfilled all of their requirements, but the question was what to do first and how to modernize. So some of the issues they started to run into very quickly is we said, okay, well, let's do perhaps the one with the least moving parts first. Let's look at mobile users. So we right now they were using LDAP for authentication, and then they were using a Radius SSID, a Radius key as the little plastic chips you get with the 3-digit code or the app on the phone as the stage 2 for second factor. But they had designs to move to Azure AD or Entra AD as it is now, and use that SAML single sign-on experience, perhaps integrating with biometrics. But they didn't have the capacity to do the testing for that when we were spinning up GP. So although this was the right technology for them, they lacked the time to do the testing and move into this new future. So what they ended up doing was retrofitting the old authentication method into the new Prisma Access system. And now they're still stuck on it. 2 years later, they've not been able to transition away to the new auth system with Azure AD. If they'd had someone helping them at the time, they could have got that tested, they could have got that verified and had it signed off. And so when you moved on to the new Prisma system, you were ready to go. Similarly with the remote network side in the blue here, so moving away the subscriptions from the on-premise firewalls up to remote networks, and then in time phasing those out with Prisma SD-WAN boxes. They had very little documentation of how their site was put together. They didn't really know the local IP addressing schema, if there were overlaps or not. Some of them did have SD-WAN, some of them didn't. Some were run by competent IT staff locally, some weren't. So what it boiled down to was they needed to send somebody around to every site individually to do that site survey, to catalog those IP addresses, to make it clear what it was that was changing. Some needed updated firewalls, so then that was physical hands on site to install that. And again, they chose not to go with somebody to help, so they had to put their own staff in the car and drive around to different locations or send out complex instructions and do these cutovers remotely. And there were problems doing that. They ran into unexpected gotchas. Whereas if they'd had a partner helping them, doing that survey work and properly project managing it, that would have saved them a lot of time. Often with these large network transformations, as I'm sure many of you on the call will know, it's often more about communication upwards, and being able to package what you're doing articulately to the customer is almost as valuable as doing the project itself. Being able to demonstrate value to the C-suite that, hey, we've invested this money and here's how far we are on the project, is taking load away from the IT team themselves from having to do that. A customer in parallel of ours did take project management and is having a much better experience rolling this out. So could your teams, could you work with a customer or with the clients you've got just now, with the opportunities to front end a project management proposal to say this will de-risk your project, this will make it more successful as we go through these phases of change and this transformation. And now the user is in a good place finally, much longer than it should have taken, but they are able to deliver on those outcomes. They are secure by design. Users are identified as soon as they hit the network. They are user ID'd. Every application that they are using is identified at the site level. As they then pass into the cloud and access SaaS applications, that network traffic is decrypted and secured by Prisma Access. And as they're going to the public cloud, those connections are brokered and secured through Prisma Access as well, whether they're coming from a user in a coffee shop or indeed an airplane into the cloud. So if we look at the customers, I go back a bit into what they wanted to achieve, they were able to achieve this huge security transformation just using fundamentally one product, Prisma Access, and its different features across mobile user access, SD-WAN, CASB, and secure web gateway. And that is what I really wanted to drive home today, is that often these things are billed as one of the technologies. And I think it would be advisable when you're pitching this to customers to focus on the technology at hand, focus on the technology they need. But often there can be project sprawl. So keep that in mind. And as we're pitching these transformations to customers, as we're saying to the business, we can help you change into the new world that is inevitable now with the explosion of SaaS, with the explosion of cloud. But let's help you do it in a managed way that isn't going to provide disappointment and instead is going to be measured success. I put some ideas here in bullet points for the other project types that I've been involved in that aren't really, some of them are to do with Palo Alto technology, but most I've put on the screen are really to do with good ideas or gotchas that you guys could help your customers with. So looking at that first bullet point, as I mentioned, modern authentication, as they're moving to SASE, it's a great chance to move to that new authentication standard that they've been looking at, but not quite, maybe they don't really understand it, maybe they need some help there. Not forgetting the integration with the service desk, how as we change the way people are connecting and we're changing the hops that people are going through and the different problems folk are going to encounter now that they're working from home on a corporate device and it's corporate sanctioned, how can the service desk manage that? Is the service desk measuring or a common service desk metric is being able to fix first? So rather than escalating the ticket to level 2, 3, is level 1 able to close? Are we enabling them to do that? We can do that with ADEM in Prisma Access. Not forgetting the desktop team. So how are these, how is Global Protect or Talon or client lists or explicit proxy being rolled out to these endpoints? Are the desktop team being included? Are those Windows images being tested? Who's managing that testing? And then often existing Palo Alto customers or greenfield Palo Alto customers, often they're using maybe a legacy form of user ID or a different username format for what they want to use now in their modern authentication. That can cause problems as well. So kind of helping them be on top of that, helping them be cognizant that those are challenges they can run into. Looking at secure web gateway projects as well, like do they have a default route in their network? If we're now saying to move away from proxy and they want to go to full tunnel, as many compliance standards now require full tunnel VPN and say proxy is no longer good enough, how do we help customers transform those LAN networks and WAN networks to conform in that way? How are you managing whitelisting? Is there a way to automate it? Now that there's a new security tool, when users are blocked from accessing the content they need, is there an automated way of streamlining that? Can we help customers automate the alerts and errors that they're getting through the system? Enabling credential detection is always a good one, and I've put decryption there in red letters. Decryption now in 2024 is not optional. 95%, in fact, probably more than that now, of web traffic is encrypted, and threat actors know that. And so if they're encrypting the C2 traffic, they're encrypting the files that they are passing in and out of the network. If you're not decrypting that content, then you're not seeing it. So helping customers start the decryption journey if they've not, helping them to tighten it up if they've run into problems, helping them with their certificate management. That is key, I think, for success with any SASE and web security project across the vendor stack. And finally, on CASB, often it's a multi-department, multidisciplinary activity. You've got information governance, you've got security, you've got the network team. How is the traffic being steered? Who has access to what? What data should be where? So again, helping facilitate those conversations and helping the company to transform not only the technology they're using, but the processes that they've maybe established. I'm talking to a lot of CISOs now that are asking me, how do I know what my user base is submitting to these LLM large language models? How do I know my developers are not just uploading code straight from ChatGPT or similar? We need something like a CASB to be reading and inspecting and telling you who's accessing it and what content is going into those large language models. That's a CASB project. And it's going to take some consolidation of that traffic through known security enforcement points And now we're talking a SASE project. Thank you so much for attending. I hope this content has been useful.